Hello, computer.
This is Hello Computer, a series of interviews carried out in 2023, at a time when artificial intelligence appears to be going everywhere all at once. Our next interview is with David Tuffley, Senior Lecturer in Applied Ethics and CyberSecurity at Griffith University in Australia, and an anthropology, psychology and philosophy specialist.
I'm Dr. David Tuffley, and I am a Senior Lecturer in Applied Ethics and CyberSecurity at Griffith University in Australia.
David, could you give me an idea of your experience with AI today? When did you first, discover or learn that computers could think, or that people were trying to make them think? What's your history of AI?
Well, I've been in the IT industry for a long time, first as a practitioner working in industry. Part of that was in the UK, some of it in Australia. But then I went into academia, and one of the things that I got really interested in was the social impact of technology, broadly speaking, and that's a very broad topic area. But one of the most interesting aspects of that was, what kind of effect does AI have on employment? Now, going back a few years, it was having minimal effect on employment, say 5-10 years ago, but that situation, as we've heard recently, is rapidly changing, and there's a lot of talk about how it might just be taking over lots of people's jobs. So specifically, what I got interested in, my kids were at high school at the time, and I started thinking, well, what kind of world are they going to be entering into when they leave school? How can I equip them with the best start, the best sort of information that will help them prosper in the world that is coming? And inevitably, it came round to the impact of AI on the world of employment. And at that time, there was really quite a lot of alarmist talk going on about how, everybody's job is about to be automated, and we ought to be really worried about all of that. But when you look at it more critically, you realize that there are a lot of jobs that people don't want to do, and it's hard to find people who will do those jobs. These are the dirty jobs, the dangerous jobs, the remote jobs, the jobs that, for one reason or another, are not really what regular people want to do. And they're already being automated and have done for some time now. And I don't think anybody really minds that. In Australia, they are remote mining settlements have robot-controlled trucks to haul the ore. Underground mining elsewhere in the world is being done by, robotic miners. Nobody really minds that they're not crouched down in, horrible conditions like that. So technically speaking, any job that can be described as a process is capable of being automated. But I think the mistake is made that people assume that just because it can be automated, that it will be automated. But that's not so. There are a lot of jobs that will always need another human to do. You go to the doctor, you don't want to be talking to a robot. You want an empathic human sitting across from you, understanding your concerns. But not just that, there's lots of jobs like that. And there can be political reasons too. Governments don't want to bring about large-scale unemployment, so they'll keep people in jobs that, perhaps could be automated. So for all sorts of reasons, I got very interested in that, and that then led me to think about, what skills do people need in order to prosper in a world where AI is there in the workplace and perhaps taking over some jobs? What can people do in order to really stay on top or stay ahead, really, and be in-demand employees?
And how do they do that, David? Please.
Okay. Well, it does kind of beg the question. Sorry, Josh. Yeah, basically, all the big consulting houses, we're talking Price Waterhouse, Deloitte, all of those guys, the big half dozen, they've all been looking very carefully at this whole situation, the impact of AI on employment, and they have all come to a somewhat similar conclusion. They conclude, and this was my conclusion too, that the partnership of human with AI is the way of the future. That the best example is in the world of chess, actually. When computers came along and they beat, the grandmasters, everyone said, oh, computers, they're the best chess player. But that's not actually the case. It is the partnership of a computer with a really good human chess player. And together they are unbeatable. They can beat computers and they can beat other players, the combination. And they call that the Centaur, as in, the horse with the human head. And that principle holds true in every field, in every profession. And it's absolutely for sure that every profession is going to have its AI tools going forwards, and the people who will do well are the ones who make it their business to learn how to use those tools and become, the master of those tools, so that they can then, it's like a force multiplier. They leverage their 1 horsepower, 1 human power output can become 5 times that output, or 10 times, depending. So that's really it. And the people who aren't going to do so well are the ones who see all of this coming and simply refuse to do anything about it. They say, oh, look, I'm too old to do that. I've learned enough. I think I'm just going to cruise along with the way I'm going. Sooner or later, they're going to find themselves marginalized. It may not be straight away. And some professions, the more traditional ones, they can probably, serve out their time until retirement with that sort of mindset. But certainly not the IT industry and, other ones that are more rapidly evolving like that.
I love the Centaur analogy. I've read about that elsewhere, and I'm so pleased that you brought that up. The idea of humans and machines working together to be, as you said, that force multiplier. So what we're saying is people shouldn't be scared. People should be ready to evolve into a Centaur.
Yeah, people should be looking at what's going on in their field. And if they don't have a field, if they're still at school and they're wondering what to do with themselves, well, then, look around at what's going on in the world and choose a field that interests them and make it their business to learn as much as they can about the current technology that is underpinning that field. Because for sure, it is going to continue to evolve. And, so people turning up for a job interview, the one who has those additional skills with the technology, they're the ones who are more than likely to get the job over the ones who, they could be very good technically, but if they're not right up the tools, well, they've got a handicap.
So you've said in the past that you see AI as an enabling technology, like electricity. Perhaps you could explain a little bit more about that.
Yeah, that's the really exciting thing about this. There have been parallels drawn, and I think there's a lot of truth to them, that 100 plus years ago, when electricity first became widely deployed, you could have it at your house, you could connect to the grid. Almost immediately, entrepreneurial people, inventive, creative people, started thinking, well, we've got this energy source that will turn a manually operated machine into, a machine that's driven by an electric motor. And so whole industries, General Electric in the US, they became one of the biggest corporations in the world because of that one thing. They got right onto the potential of making electrical devices. And I believe Thomas Edison was one of the founders of General Electric, so he could see the commercial potential of something like this. And so when you consider that electricity then created a whole range of industries that operated on electricity, labor-saving devices for the home, for the farm, for the factory. Today, with the AI is really a tool that can be applied in any number of ways. And so there are creative people right this second thinking of, well, let's take this object that is not smart at the moment and let's put AI into it and make it smart. And there are literally hundreds of objects like that, and that'll be the Internet of Things. These objects will have a internet connection, and they will be able to do all sorts of useful things, automated things for people. It's not sinister. It could be as simple as turning the kettle on in the morning, or turning off lights, something like that. But so really, we haven't begun to see the potential of AI being incorporated into a whole category of new devices. And I'll just give you an example here. McKinsey in Australia released a report recently, not too long ago, in which they said that if Australian business were to embrace the potential of AI in order to be more competitive, to use it, in whatever way they can think of to use it, that over the next 15 years, it will generate between 1 trillion and 4 trillion Australian dollars of additional value to the economy, to the Australian economy. Now, to the UK economy, multiply that by 10. Yours is a much larger economy than ours, but the same principle will apply there. So that's going to create a whole bunch of new jobs. We don't really know what those jobs are going to look like just yet, but we know that they will exist. We know this because every generation, with every new wave of technology that comes along, people are worried about being put out of work. But the new technology generates new jobs. Some old jobs go, but new jobs come. So it is a very powerful tool that we've seen emerge, this ChatGPT 3 and 4, almost immediately, within weeks. A whole bunch of startups in Silicon Valley and elsewhere in the world have taken that tool and have started to do really interesting things with it, and all sorts of different things. And so, that's how fast it's evolving. And, hold on, buckle up your seatbelt. It's going to be a wild ride, I think.
There is a pace of change, isn't there, that feels almost a little disconcerting, certainly to people who aren't as involved, perhaps, with the boffins in the enclosed rooms. We the public do feel a little discombobulated, perhaps. You were saying there about how the effect on different economies, and there is a nationalistic approach to this at the moment. But of course, electricity doesn't have a nationality. When it becomes so pervasive that it is as common as electricity, it just becomes a global thing there. So what's going to happen at the global level, do we think?
Well, I think there'll be rapid dissemination globally. First in the developed world, but one of the optimistic things about what's happening these days is how quickly technology is being what you might call democratized, in the sense that once the R&D costs have been worked out, the cost of these things can become really quite low or even free. Now, best example there would be a smartphone. The smartphone has got a whole bunch of apps on it that 10, 15, 20 years ago would have called for a standalone device that would have cost a lot of money. So a 4K video camera, if they even existed 15 years ago, I doubt if they did, would have cost many thousands of pounds. And yet it's just, it's on the phone and you get it when you buy the phone. GPS, you name it. There's dozens of apps that do useful things that are just bundled in and don't actually cost any extra to have. Yeah, there may be a moderate cost or a very small cost, but much, much less than it would have otherwise been. And so I think what we're seeing is fairly quick dissemination of this sort of technology into the developing world with very good effect. So I gather that, I believe there is a smartphone that's made in India and another one elsewhere that can be sold for around about $5. Now, I could be wrong about that, but I read an article and it sounded right. It's a pretty cut down thing, but it does connect to the internet. And someone in a developing country with one of these phones connected to the internet essentially has access to the collective knowledge of the entire human race. And they can then start working out solutions to the problems that they have. I read one case study where a farmer in Nigeria was having problems with blight in his crop, and he went to the village, he got online, and he found out that somewhere else, maybe in the US, this is how they were dealing with that blight. And he said, yeah, we can do that. So he went back, he did this solution and had a bumper crop that year. Now, that's even before smartphones came in. And so, I think what we're seeing is a very, you might say it's not fast enough. It could always be faster, but we are seeing really quite quick improvements to the quality of life of people living in developing parts of the world. Other benefits there would be education, because if you've got one of these phones, you can educate yourself. And a person who wants to be educated can be, and they can then do something with that. They can start a business. It empowers women to start a business. Micro loans, borrow $10 to start a business. The Grameen Bank has found that they have 100% repayment of the loan amounts that the people they lend money to always pays it back. So, I think there's cause for optimism, but still pretty slow progress, I guess.
I do hope that most of us would agree that the leveling of the playing field is a great thing. What are the governments doing? Are the governments around the world keeping up with this? Can they keep up with this? What should we be looking out for?
That's a great question, George. I think, when you look at the makeup of most elected bodies, you find a combination of lawyers and union officials and others, but, it tends to be lawyers and, activists of one kind. And, lawyers and union officials, they're smart people, they are, but they don't necessarily understand technology. And so a lot of governments are really quite challenged to understand the full impact, the full implications of technology. Now, I think that situation is changing. I don't know about the UK, but in Australia, there are one or two MPs who are, tech savvy, and that's helping. But there's a lot of ground to cover to catch up. And so governments on the whole are tending to play catch up. Has been my observation, and I don't see that situation changing anytime really soon. But you only have to look at the process of law reform Law reform is by nature a slow and very deliberate process, but the pace of technological change is really quite fast. So there is a widening gap between what laws need to be right now in order to properly govern the cyber domain and what actually exists. So there is a bit of grey area there that, some bad actors are taking advantage of. But it's not an insurmountable problem. I think it can be fixed in time. So governments, they show willing, but they probably need to get more tech-savvy people into their ranks so that they can, argue persuasively for, what needs to be argued for in Parliament.
What are the security risks at the moment in the world?
Yeah. Cybersecurity is one of my areas that I teach, and that is the big challenge that most developed countries have, is developing sufficient cybersecurity capability to properly secure their infrastructure. You only have to look at how many, quite catastrophic data breaches there have been in, recent times. And what's partly driving this is that cybercrime is becoming commercialized in jurisdictions that are fairly tolerant of cybercrime being carried out. It's possible to, on the dark web, to buy a toolkit, that basically allows someone to do ransomware attacks or various other cyber attacks for, a sum of money you pay in cryptocurrency, and people are getting on board. People who aren't necessarily super tech savvy, but are a bit tech savvy. So it is, the playing field is becoming more crowded with people who would like to, make some easy money.
And what happens when that kind of bad actor cybersecurity toolkit is available to anybody with $10 or with $20? An affordable amount of money means I have the same cybersecurity arsenal at my disposal as a state-sponsored group somewhere in the world.
Yeah, there would be, a degree of difference between what the state-sponsored level would be able to do. There are basically 4 levels of cybercrime. There is the first, as you just mentioned, the state-sponsored. Then there is the organized crime level, which is not far below that. They tend to go for financial attacks, banks, financial institutions. Then there is the talented but lone wolf operator who, they're in the game and they're doing the business. Then there are the wannabes, teenagers sitting in their mother's basement, disaffected, resentful to the world, and thinking, well, I'm getting earache about making something of myself, making a living. Well, this is one way I can do it. So all 4 of those are problems to be countered, but the degree of difficulty in countering them is commensurate to the level. So the state-sponsored ones are by far the most difficult to deal with. But yeah.
What are your thoughts on the Turing test? Has that been passed? Was it ever a thing? Was it ever required? Do we need a new test? What is it all about?
Yeah. Yes, I think the Turing test certainly was very useful for many years, ever since Alan Turing put it forward as an idea. And it made sense. It was intuitively acceptable. If you're talking to someone and they sound human, They're saying very interesting, cogent things. Well, yeah, okay, so that could be a measure. But what we now see just out there, and which people can access this sort of technology, is chat AI that can probably quite easily pass the Turing test if you didn't know. And it's been suggested that these AIs are actually conscious. Some people have gone so far as to suggest that it's approaching artificial general intelligence, which is, human level intelligence. But the fact is that the current AI is very good at simulating consciousness, simulating sentience without actually being sentient. Now, I think it does point to there needing to be a new test to evaluate that. But the problem there, of course, is the most wicked problem facing neuroscience, the most difficult problem facing theologists and psychologists and many other fields is the nature of consciousness. Nobody really knows what it is. We know it exists, we know it when we have it, but we don't understand it. Now, some people might say, well, it's just a function of the electrical activity in your brain. Bit too simplistic. So my answer would be, yes, we need a new one, but we don't really know what that would be, because we would need to know more about what consciousness is before we could devise such a test. And that's the challenge that lies in front of us. But, I'm sure that people are working on this problem as we speak.
What happens when we introduce brain-computer interfaces into this? What happens there?
Yes. Now, that's where, people out there are going to be getting a little bit uneasy about how fast this is all moving. You may have seen in the news about maybe 12 months ago now that an American company, Neuralink, has been doing some interesting work. They have a coin-sized neural implant that is surgically implanted into the skull by a surgical robot that splices no less than 1,000 microfilaments to known parts of the cerebral cortex, and it allows that person, that the owner of that brain, to communicate with the outside world via that Neuralink. Now, the test they've done has been on a macaque monkey called Pager. And they put one of these implants in, and they taught Pager how to play Pong, that very early computer game where you operate a ping pong paddle. Well, not only was Pager able to learn how to play Pong, he played it like a boss. He actually, was very good at it. So he was taught how to do it in the regular way. And as he played in the regular way, they were mapping the neural impulses of his brain as measured by this Neuralink. And they mapped it so that a command to do this was mapped as a certain pattern. And they were then able to replicate that. And after a while, Pager was able to play Pong with his mind. And so that offers great comfort to people with, say, paraplegics, quadriplegics, people with neurodegenerative diseases of all kinds. It can even help with tinnitus, a whole range of things. And, it is showing very promising results. It hasn't yet got through the FDA testing procedure, and that's always going to be difficult. It has to be proven safe on humans. I have no doubt that it will eventually be passed, and then we will see willing human subjects having this installed maybe a quadriplegic who is then able to move around. But that's not where it ends. That Neuralink can also be connected to the cloud via a 5G or 4G. 4G is the current one, isn't it? 4G. 5G will come. Broadband communication, it will communicate with the cloud. And so let's say I'm giving a talk like this in front of a big audience, and I really want to marshal my best game. I might be able to then draw down some cognitive resources from the cloud that would give my brain, my own biological brain, a boost, the boost that it needs. Now, I'm not going to be in any hurry to have one of these things installed, I hasten to add, but that's one of the things that it could do, theoretically. Another thing would be two people who've got the implant would be able to communicate, well, I'll say telepathically, because it's not verbal. It's going, via this Neuralink. And that's a very broad sort of broadband communication. So they could probably convey more meaning in a minute with that than two people using words could convey in an hour, perhaps. So, there's all sorts of potential there, but down the track, when it's all proven very safe, I'm one of those people who I'm very interested, and it sounds good, but I want to know that it's perfectly safe. And even then I might not do it, but I'm sure some people will, and it's probably going to benefit them.
But let's nail this down. So what we're saying here is telepathy within a decade. Is that what we're saying?
Perhaps, yeah, that might be a good way of putting it. Telepathy in the sense that, there's nothing mumbo jumbo about it. It is simply two people thinking and communicating their thoughts via a broadband conduit to another person's brain. Oh, and it could be more than one person too. It doesn't just have to be one-to-one. So yes, I mean, it could be a way of, at the moment we teleconference, we sit and we look at each other and we talk, and it's almost as good as sitting in a room with somebody. But perhaps in the future, perhaps a fair way in the future, people will meet in a more intimate way like that.
What does popular culture have to tell us about technology?
Yeah. Well, popular culture produces, almost without exception, dystopian sci-fi. And I think this is one reason why people are scared of technology going forwards, is that, well, a story is not very interesting if, it doesn't have conflict, if there isn't, an adversary to overcome. And so almost all sci-fi stories feature technology that's gone wrong, technology that's gone rogue, that's malfunctioned, that has basically decided that, we humans are a waste of space on the face of this planet and we all need to be exterminated. That's what we see again and again and again. And unless you know what the technology is doing and what it's capable of and what the checks and balances are in a society, then, it's not going to happen like that, because it's kind of, here we are here, and suddenly you jump to this catastrophic endpoint, having bypassed the dozen or more intermediate stages, any one of which could be used to, ward off the problem. We just jump straight to the catastrophic end and we worry about that. So pop culture is something of a problem in this regard. It has created a sense of anxiety, I think, in society. There's no doubt about that. But you know what? The interesting thing is that those early sci-fi writers like Jules Verne, like H.G. Wells, their ideas influenced generations of engineers. Verne did his 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, was it 40? The submarine was called Nautilus, and it's no coincidence that the very first nuclear submarine that the Americans had was the Nautilus. He also said to the moon and back. They did a moonshot. And so I think there's always been an interesting relationship between imaginative sci-fi writers and the engineers and technologists who actually create the technology. I think there's quite a bit of cross-fertilization of ideas there. So, it's not all bad. It's some of it's pretty good.
Earlier on this conversation, you actually came up with the idea of a conversational kettle. So there are all sorts of things that will be available before we get to the end of the world scenarios, I imagine.
Yeah.
But what happens when people start falling in love with technology in a true way? What happens there?
That is such a great question. The online dating scene has matured massively in recent years, and they are using AI to become much better. So when it first got going, they operated on a questionnaire type basis, got people to fill in a questionnaire, but big surprise, people weren't always entirely honest about what they said on their questionnaire. So what they now do is they get permission, but they look at that person's social media platforms and get a much more accurate idea about the kind of person they are, what they like, the things they're interested in, that sort of information. And the AI is very good at making deductions about what sort of compatible person there might be for them, so they can match people up based on what the AI comes up with. And it is proving actually to be really quite effective. Now, I don't have any personal experience with this, but I wrote an article about it a little while back, and it has matured to the point where people are no longer ashamed to say, oh, we met online, oh yeah, we did that. And so what? No big deal. And, but that's where we're currently at. But where we're going with it is that I think when the AI gets even cleverer, it's going to be able to create an entire persona in cyberspace. No, it's not a real person, but it's a personality based on a person's likes. And that can be an avatar that has all the right characteristics, the looks, the everything, tailor-made for a person. It's their ideal friend, their ideal romantic partner. And at that point, it's going to be very tempting for some people to turn away from in-person socializing and romancing to, just an online sort of way of doing that. And the step beyond that is when an Android robot device, we're miles from that yet, but when that AI can then be embodied into a physical humanoid shape, I'd estimate probably 15 years from now, we will see that. And it'll happen because we know that a lot of money is being invested in developing those sorts of androids. It doesn't really make it into the mainstream press. It's all part of that whole sort of pornography industry that doesn't get talked about. But, there's money going into it. So I suppose really the danger then is that more and more people will lead isolated lives. So, for example, in Japan, there is a social phenomenon called the hikikomori, who are people who never go out. They've not left their apartment in years. and they have no desire to, and they live a completely isolated life, and many of them end up dying, and nobody finds them for, a couple of months. And, it's really a very sad situation overall. But I think that sort of phenomenon is only going to be worsened, I suppose, by the availability of online companionship. Now, I wouldn't be saying we should prevent it, we should ban it, we should regulate against it. Well, it wouldn't work anyway, unless it's banned everywhere in the world. It's going to happen. But I think it sort of comes back on the individual to govern their own lives and to be responsible for their lives. And I mean, it really comes down to that, doesn't it? Not to become a victim of technology, but be master of it.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of people that I'm talking to are saying this isn't a technology problem, this isn't a government problem, this is an individual problem. This is people as individuals that have to change. But David, what line can we draw between AI, loneliness, and national security? How does that all work together?
Okay. Look, I think that I don't really see it as a national security issue. I think AI can provide people with a very rich experience, particularly I think virtual reality and augmented reality is very nearly upon us, and we are going to see very advanced AR and VR technologies, and it'll allow, let's say I've always wanted to visit, the South Pole. I could probably go there and have a richly high definition experience of that. The Sistine Chapel, I went to Rome one time and it was going to take me 4 hours of queuing to get into St. Peter's, but so I didn't bother. But maybe I could just, go there virtually. And I think so from a tourism point of view, from an entertainment point of view, from an educational point of view, there are so many applications that, legitimate, healthy things that people can be doing.
For me, it's the fundamental difference between you meeting somebody in the street who is a human being that you never fall in love with, and then but if you're doing this online or in the metaverse or this, then that person is there because of a commercial entity. And you'll always have Mark Zuckerberg as the gooseberry at the party. You're always going to have Google sat at the table with you. It's that how love develops. And as you say, this is happening anyway.
The old saying that if you're not paying for a service, then you are the product. Your data is the product. And that is true of a lot of social media platforms. Now, some social media platforms extract more data than others. And, there are privacy concerns around that as well. But I don't know that there's any easy solution to that. I think if people enjoy the platform, even if they're being warned about the dangers, it's been an issue with TikTok about it. And, people are warned about it, but a lot of people are just saying, yes, so what? Who cares? So I don't care. I just like watching videos. And what are they going to do with the fact that I like watching videos? So it is seductive, and it can be very it can be very habit forming and very difficult to break. So I do think that it does come back to that each person being a sovereign individual who needs to take responsibility for their own welfare and, mental well-being. But, convincing people of that can be a bit of a hard task sometimes because, they're kind of into a hedonistic pursuit. hey, I enjoy my technology. I don't want to change. And so I think there's a strong sort of educational component there. It's probably a parental responsibility is to make kids aware of that. I certainly did that when my kids were really young. And they've grown up, quite savvy about these things. So I think it's possible, but it's certainly feasible. But it's going to be one of the problems that faces us going forwards, I think.
Subscribe to the Hello Computer channel here on YouTube to hear more interviews with experts as the world comes to terms with thinking machines.